So what would you like to get involved in?
So like this closest I've got, I tried a Linux from scratch installation.
I'm sorry.
Once. Yeah. That was pretty cool, learning experience. But what's like a basic way that you can start, say, modifying the kernel code to do some little toy things so you can, okay, I made a change that I can notice and enjoy, and then inspire some interest in playing with this or that.
I mean, I usually, the way I approach that when I'm looking at user space processes, and I'm not a kernel developer, I have strong about, is that look for something that's the dumbest little device that you've got and modify something. There's a dummy virtual frame buffer driver for FBDev. There's probably dummy character or block devices where the only thing they do is respond to the octals and light back up. And so then you leave that on. Like that seems to me like the easiest way I would want to start. But it's a strange thing to say, how do I get started on kernel hacking? Because it's sort of like saying, how do I get started on life? Like it's this really big.
So the question is, do you have something that you want to make work?
That's another key.
That's usually the way people start.
Scratching
to scratch it. So you have a piece of.
Writing too much and it doesn't work, then you fix that.
Yeah.
Or
something that you're particularly interested in that you'd like to know more about. If there's some subsystem that you'd like to learn about, the best way of going about that is to go and read the mailing list, or go and ask the developers.
Complain to the mailing list about something that doesn't work.
Yeah, and
see
say,
what the patches
or are there any bugs that, easy bugs that you'd like to have, somebody look at and learn the process by, trying to fix a simple bug. Yes.
What idea I had was
what
that,
you find is that most of the subsystems, the maintainers and the other senior developers will spend the time to teach you how to
sometimes
do
Some
what you need. Some of them do. I mean,
Not in the management.
not yet.
What they're essentially saying is you need to find a project that you're passionate about and get involved.
If what you're trying to do is
and so forth. That is actually very hard, but that's the way you have to do it.
what you're trying to do is just figure out sort of how it all fits together. Toys like UML are actually, the user mode Linux build are actually a really nice way of doing that. If you've ever used a debugger before, right? I want to know on this little bit of this fake system underneath me, I want to know what happens when I call read on this file. Oh, I can set a breakpoint on that entry. That's this call. Step through GDB and walk your way through, or have it print K out to the console and modify that so that whenever these paths happen, oh, I'm running through this call shortcuts, right? If what you're trying to do is just learn how the thing in front of you works, then look at the code in front of you, set a breakpoint at an obvious place, hit a print F and say, that's where, okay, I hit this now. But if you're trying to solve a problem, that's that's a different approach. So you kind of have to come from the perspective of, am I trying to learn how this is functioning already, or am I trying to fix something that's currently blocking me? And so asking, how do I get started, you have to answer one of those questions first.
Another approach is if you don't have any itches and you scratch, somebody else does. And I used to lead the PA Learners project, and we ended up bringing like half a dozen people into free software development in one way or another, mostly not kernel, but Carl O'Donnell, who's currently the glibc, one of the glibc maintainers. He got started on PA Linux. He was just hacking away on stuff. We all needed to work in order to make the PA Linux course successful, and he found his calling. He got hired. He got after graduating from university, got hired. If you do a good enough job scratching other people's itches, you're going to get involved and find out things you really want to know.
I guess that's the problem I have with a lot of open source projects in general, that even if they're very loudly calling out, oh, we want contributors, there's no kind of user-friendly landing.
Terrible.
And you even approach them, you you email the very person who's asking, oh, we
Yeah,
really need
you-
contributors.
you know
They
what that
basically
is.
tell you to fuck off.
You know why that is though? Because what happens is you get a lot of people that are just really annoying, that don't actually, you know, if you come and say, oh yeah, that'd be great to have some patches, and then you get, instead of a patch, you get another annoying complaint. You know, that happens so much. People have very little time until you demonstrate at least the kickoff that you're going to be able to help out in some way. So it's sort of it's a catch-22, and you need to uncatch the 22.
Because I feel like I don't want to spend like a couple of months looking through the whole
Well,
code
let's
base
take that,
by
because you're talking about
myself.
spending a lot longer than a couple of months.
I mean, not with the code,
If you really want
in
to,
general.
if you really want to make,
That's why, from experience,
spend-
it's better to actually have a specific goal. It's better to pick up some kind of USB device that doesn't work properly, something. As a
Or
specific
even,
goal,
or even
that really
another,
helps.
another thing that kernel people, in my experience, having to heard on like a couple dozen kernel people at Red Hat, oftentimes we do the kernel bits, and then we declare victory, and the user space manageability and how to use it, how to actually make it usable for humans is entirely missing. So you can start with documentation or even the user space driving of something. Then as you start in with that, testing performance and stuff, you're actually writing code that's easy to debug in user space that uses kernel mechanisms directly. Then you get into the kernel things. Oh yeah, I tried this from user space and clearly this is broken. There's ways to start top down, and it's stuff that kernel people actually traditionally really suck at and hate to do. Anything, right?
Documentation is something that is a good way in, because often things are not very well documented. But to document it properly, you actually have to go through the process of learning how it works and what it actually does and how the code works. So the act of actually documenting it is effectively a process of learning how the code works. So if you pick a subsystem once again that you're interested in, there's no documentation for this. As you walk through it and learn how it works, write documentation for them.
In fact, probably, usually the way I tell my application developers to write their code is just write it as though the spec worked, and when it's broken, we'll fix our driver, right? So that I work on graphic stuff. So write as if OpenGL works the way you expect it, and then when it doesn't show up correctly, okay, now that's our bug. If you find a kernel API that seems underdocumented, you're going the way you will document it is you will write test code that drives it. You will probably find out that it's broken. So write a little dummy app that does the simplest thing with whatever kernel API or subsystem that you're interested in, and notice that it doesn't work.
No, that's already, If you can find a subsystem that doesn't already have one, writing a test/regression suite for it, whether it's testing error path, passing voluntarily correct argument, checking the result, not something that's already covered by the random files and stuff, but targeted at that subsystem. Again, pick an area of interest that you have. This is something that can be very, very useful.
Yeah, and similarly, performance testing stuff that you can never get enough of. Tonight we run your application on the newest kernel and see if we've made you suck. And try to figure out what we broke. Right? That's a really interesting way to go back.
I mean, the main thing is that if you actively get involved in doing something like this, it might just be something on the fringes, testing your application or updating a man page or something like that. If you keep doing that, then people will the maintainers will tell them, they'll get to know you, right? And they'll then start to take the time to help you. So if you just come in and say, I want to do this,
you're wasting time.
you're probably going to just hear the sound of crickets in the background. But if you're doing even little small things and show that you over a period of time, a couple of months is usually more than sufficient. A little man page patch a week will suddenly people start to pay attention to.
Anything that's
there's
not
a persistence there, and you're showing that you're willing to spend time and learn. That's probably the best way to get somebody to actually pay attention.
The key thing though is do your homework. Don't come up with something where you haven't spent the time of making reasonably confident that you know what you're doing. I mean, how many times do you get something where my response is pretty much, if I respond at all, let me Google that for you. You have to do your homework. There's many people who just don't even try to figure out how it should have been done, how it could have been done better.
Very happy to complain. Well, I'm just wondering if that is the sort of stuff that you're asking.
Yeah, that does, I mean, obviously the specifics of how you get from, oh yeah, I could help with the documentation, then where specifically do you go to?
Yeah, locate the mailing lists. But I don't know about
The
others,
wiki
but
pages, the mailing lists,
Yeah.
most projects of any size have some kind of documentation, like a wiki page. If you're looking for something in the kernel, look in your maintainers file, because the
Yeah.
maintainers, the mailing lists, and so on. Often there's pointers to the actual documentation pages as well, and whatnot. So that's probably your best place to find your initial contact.
yeah, some things like what I've best don't have much at all except for a mailing list.
I'm no kernel developer, but yeah, contributed to a few projects and put out a couple of mailing lists. And there's a huge difference in how people treat emails. From like really friendly guys, even if there's no documentation, they'll just email you personally and say this is how it works, you know, we'll help us out. To you submit a patch and they're like, you're an uneducated jackass, like, why are you wasting my time? You should have done a patch, you should have done your homework. Like, well, actually I did, and I submitted a patch in my original email. They're like, don't try to quote back to me. Seriously? And they're like, well, okay, I'll go to the other person.
There is.
It does happen.
Well, I'll see you in a nutshell.
It does happen.
But
People
there's
say I'm
something
not like
we
that.
can
People
probably
say
do
I'm
from
not like that.
our
but I
side as well, which is that we have, there are a bunch of subsystems that do use bugs that look up kernels also. And it would be nice if people who work on those subsystems would go through those bugs and flag some of them as, this looks easy to fix, but I don't currently have the motivation all the time to do it. I have a pile of bugs in x86 platform drivers that are theoretically easy to fix, and I could describe how to fix them much more quickly than it would take to actually fix them, and which would then be ideal for someone to read that if they have the hardware to then write a patch, send it to me. And I'll have much more motivation to give patch feedback than I will to just fix someone's specifically not working driver for the most part. And even if it ends up taking me more time to go through the process of fixing patch up, getting it merged, than to just write it myself, that's going to be easier for me to justify than it would be to do it myself. So if we could actually spend some time flagging bugs like that, things that would actually be ideal for someone to come along and just spend a couple of days on, and they'll likely get a small working patch into mainline out of it, that would seem like a really helpful way of getting something
And one thing
created.
that would help, even just on the wiki page for projects, is a kind of list of prerequisites that kind of, if you don't know this, you're never going to understand. So even if it's...
I think that's
harder to do.
That's raising barriers to say
Yeah.
you're not good enough.
There's
I don't think
okay,
that's-
so
that's
maybe
a
not
good
express
thing
it
to
that
do.
way, but
Yeah.
let's say if you're interested in this project,
Here's some background
it would be really, you'll
Okay,
be
so-
better spend your time reading this
So,
other thing
for
than trying to understand the
example,
source
if you
code.
go and look at the XFS wiki, there is a section which is papers and documentation, and that has all of the presentations, all of the papers that have been published since 1994 about what XFS is, what presentations being given at conferences like this, and so on. They describe the structure. There's things like the on-disk format. There's user manuals. There's all sorts of stuff there, and so I mean. That's just the aggregation of knowledge that's occurred over many, many years. And so in many cases, projects have sections of their wiki page. They might not be obvious at first, but there are sections where there's lots and lots of information there that you can actually just sit down and read and learn a lot from.
And in many cases, you're going to find that if you go to try to find the documentation, it may be that we're bad, like we're excellent at this, but there's documentation out there. The act of collating it will probably find something for you that says, oh, this doesn't work yet, right? If you find the documentation's not up to par, it's probably out there. Your act of either writing it or collating it, putting it in and improving that section of the wiki will be a good intro, that's a good gateway towards, oh, and now I think I know enough to be able to start attacking this bug.
But also I'd say, in a conference like this, think about what you actually passionately are interested in, what you use, what isn't good enough. Find people who work on it and say, hey, how do I get involved directly one-on-one? And people will help you.
Or what needs doing
What
here.
he's doing here, what haven't we gotten ready here?
I think most of the talks, you'll see that LCA will have a future work section or a this is what we're looking at, these are some bugs, or someone just mentioned bugs that need to be fixed, and just by the project history, just wait for that future work section to come up, and I think there'll be a lot of, there'll be ideas there, there'll be things that you might be excited about. And
So I guess one other question is, how often do you, or anybody who asks this question, how often do you approach a new code base at all? Right? Because that's actually an important skill that we don't teach, that nobody teaches. But if you look at a small package like core utils or something at all that said that you haven't read before, even that you're not interested in, but that's small enough to digest, because the actual act of approaching an unfamiliar code base and
It's extremely difficult.
getting your way around, I forget that it's harder than it is because
It's
doing it.
very hard.
So that's
the
Because
one
one
thing
thing
we
you've
never
got to
do.
be careful there is that doing that can make your eyes bleed.
One of the problems is that one thing we almost never do is we never put together and document the big picture. Whenever you look at a new project, what you really want to see is sort of a block diagram, get a rough idea. Okay, this is the big picture, these are the various components, something a little bit more detailed maybe, but and so you spend an enormous of time sort of from the bottom looking at the detail and trying to reconstruct in your mind what that big picture
That's
is.
exactly
And-
the thing that I find a barrier, that there's no,
That's true.
never any, like,
Everything.
even like the equivalent of a leaflet of welcome to our town. These are the main sites, this is the tour you should take.
And for many projects, the reason that documentation doesn't exist is because you've seen a project like that at all before, you don't need to be told, right? If you're approaching a daemon process, you know what daemon processes look like. You know how callbacks work, you know how task structures work, you know what state is like, you know how that's generally represented in the language of your choice. The kernel is unlike this because there's only the one kernel. But that once you've looked at it, it's not entirely dissimilar from a driver model in any other part of the user space whether you're talking about cups or apps or whatever, anything else that has to kind of case out based on the physical hardware presented to it. You're going to have that section. You're going to have a main loop section that the kernel is the timer interrupts and whether their process is ready to run, and in the X server is are there claims with requests on the wire, right? After you've seen enough of these projects, you don't need to be told how a project like that is generally set up unless it's super weird. So a lot of the reason why that documentation isn't there is because the people who've been working on it have seen this before.
Another thing that is all projects is that once you've spent a couple of months and you've really got your head around how the project works and that kind of thing, you can't write the documentation because it's just also obvious to you. You don't know what to write down.
It's been internalized, and in some ways, the act of even trying to start writing it down is, how do I put this out?
It's too late.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the point that Dave was trying to approach a new code base, because I've played around with the VFS and I tried maintaining one of the best code base, but recently I wanted to get into ButterFS and BTRFS, and I thought, okay, I'll get to know the code base by trying to eliminate the bug-ons. There's a whole bunch of bug-ons in there that shouldn't really be there. They should be handled, right? So now, I spent a lot of time on that. I've got a number of patches that are not good enough for submission. And it's really, really hard. It's 50,000 lines of code. I don't know any of it. I'm not particularly good with file system and Qt.io and stuff like that.
It's actually 100,000 lines of code now.
Last time I counted it was 50 and it's grown in like 10 months.
Bigger than XFS.
Wow. Anyway, coming back to the story, now, if I decide to work on that project because I finished doing what I've been doing, I thought, okay, I'll start at 10, if I want to keep it in the afternoon, I start at 10 o'clock, and after lunch I go and have a sleep because it pushes you, it's tedious, trying to solve these bug-ons, callers, callees, and trying to work through all the error handling. It's really tedious work. And that's like coming into a new system, so someone like yourself is going to have that problem with just about anything you approach. I have it myself trying to approach something new. So yeah, it's really quite hard in many different ways, but it is, it's like a development experience. And even if you've got plenty of development experience, it's still going to be hard. So yeah, anyway, hopefully that is also useful information. Don't get discouraged because it's worth it.
Thought of one thing that probably should be documented much better in the kernel, and that's, I don't know, it's pretty hard to pick up as a project, but there is some areas of the kernel, such as the VFS, where if you have not spent the last 5 years of your life dabbling in it, you have no way to understand what the various locking requirements are, what protects what, in what circumstances.
Even if you work on it, you don't understand that.
Well, yes. Now, if I was going to write a stupid file system today from scratch, and I know somewhat about file system, what I will spend the most of my time today will be to understand that, to understand what the various looking requirements and between the various APIs and the expectation of.
And again, the process of trying, if you come up with a process like that where Ben says, we don't understand this, we don't have good documentation for this, probably the active documentation will point out bugs, right?
Well, by the time you document it, alter or change it all again.
Well, so you start by reading documentation file systems VFS.txt, and then VFS logging.txt, and then you go, what the hell does this mean? And start fixing the documentation.
Oh, Mr. Dura,
But part of the problem is because it's also such a critical path in the kernel, it's also one where we've been extremely creative.
Don't start with the Don't go there.
I think your town map idea is quite good, and if there isn't one already, then that's probably a good place to start with. If you put a drawing on a map, send it to someone, and they'll go, no,
In fact,
this is wrong, do this way.
You could probably maintain a file in ASCII art or something like that. No, I think it would be useful to have in the documentation directory of the kernel a reasonably detailed block diagram of the various components and subsystems. And how they interact potentially, or at least which interact with which whom.
Be very wide.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's tricky. But
I don't think that's a newbie kind of
Well, I think
project,
it's,
though.
I mean, it's something you can get involved in straight away, and people will correct you if you're wrong. And that's a great way to learn, right? You have that.
Yeah, though mapping something kernel-wide like that requires knowing a lot about everything,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
rather than nothing about anything.
well, at least each individual subsystem could actually start with its own within the subsystem.
We've actually a really good example of how hard that is. Dave Hansen recently set out to document what does page locks protect. And that project took him like 2 weeks, I'm not sure he's done yet. And it's not
Well, part of the problem when you start going into the gory, low-level things, such as a page lock, is you also tend to change them faster than you can document them. So,
I've got a question for the maintainers in the room. If someone reports about, how often do you credit them with reported by?
every time.
Every time.
Every time.
Yeah?
Yeah, no question. That's
And
that's
I
really
generally
good.
add tested by as well if they come back and say, yes, we tested the patch,
yeah.
and it worked.
Because that would encourage, the usage of that would encourage people getting, new people getting involved, reporting bugs and stuff like that. So if you don't do it, do it.
well, I tend to encourage people. See, somebody reports something, and I sort of try to guide them toward the patch. If you use this, that I pretty much dictated the patch for them. But I'm happy for them to put a sign off and get some credit. It's a good way to encourage people to participate. If I feel like some contributor has some potential just because he tried, well, there are people who try hard and never get anywhere. But I tend to spend a significant amount of time trying to hold their hands through the beginning of the process. But I do expect in return that once I helped cut through the early bushes and get in, that there is significant homework behind. I will respond to a technical question. What is this stock for? I don't understand why you're doing that way. I will respond to that as much as possible. But in fact, you will probably get much more easily responses to precise questions about a specific detail of why this is done that way than general, how does this thing work?
Yeah. Often in the process of writing up your question in a detailed manner, you'll get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one's going to answer you if you say, if you ask a general question like that. I will simply ignore it on the list. My main project is a user space project, not necessarily a kernel project. But I'll certainly ignore general questions like that because they don't really have time.
Well, one thing to be aware of as a contributor is when a maintainer says, do things this way, don't argue with them. Don't say, no, I'm right, I'm doing it this way, unless you have really valid and strong reasons for doing it that way. We've had examples recently in the journal where people have just said, no, I'm doing it this way because it's right, and the maintainer said, no, you are very clearly wrong, do it the way I've asked, and it just goes back and forth, and those people get killed for it very quickly.
It's fine to ask once, you know, and you can come up with...
Or request clarification.
No, again, it's people play heavily. Is there any reason why you wouldn't have done it this way? I thought that might actually work. And that's fine, probably, I want to look at it, think about it. You might be right. You might do something better than what I thought about in the first place. But I had a case, there was a repeat offender recently, I don't remember his name, who he came out 5 different times on something, and then I discovered he just did the same thing to 5 other maintainers over the previous 2 weeks. And like, no, I'm not responding to anyone.
We're just trying to solve each other's problem. One way to get patches is check that because you want to just get into a little bit. Try compiling the latest tree, this tree, and compiling the grant. Now, 50% of them won't be able to work. The other 50% really all a problem that's coming in the last 1,000 years, and you listen to one line fix. That'll get you a patch.
Somebody's forgotten the semicolon.
Yeah,
That's
someone's
right,
or
yeah.
someone's missed added a config option, get to put a select or an end or something like that. Not necessarily really useful patch, but at least get you a patch and get you in the door, get you used to dealing with the community.
And get used to the process, you know,
Yeah.
used to this, how you send patches, how you just get used to the process.
Random config is actually a really good suggestion because it points to that thing we were talking about earlier about how these different subsystems interact. A lot of times what you'll find is the patch went in, A doesn't select B when it needs to.
Which is a perfect segue to testing your drivers.
Right. And that's there's a dependency between the two parts.
Yeah, it's basically generate a random.
The other thing to remember is that if you get a picture of some substance and you contribute it or you post it, you've got to remember that most probably the person that is the maintainer for that subsystem is going to be stuck with maintaining that. And every single time that I've had a substantial patch to my product, I end up maintaining it because I never see these guys again. And it's always broken in some way that I missed in the beginning of it. I'm sure that happens for everybody. And that is going to always be in the mind of people with some experience. So, and suddenly, you're going to go a patch, oh, this is a great patch, I've spent all this time on it, and they're going to be, I can't see anything wrong with it, but I'll just give them a hard time because they're going to be stuck with it. They're going to have to fix it.
Especially
and
if
they don't understand what you've done most of the time because they don't look in such detail.
Yeah.
Although they understand.
Especially if you submit a driver, try, it's really hard to continue owning it in the long run. It's some work I've done internally with my employer try to stop the attitude of fire and forget because people will just be assigned to a thing and then move on and then completely forget about it and it becomes completely unmaintainable. If you submit something, you own it and live up to it, and that's how you're going to get credit as well. And be
coming back to
trusted.
help when those problems come up, that is a big deal. That will bring a lot of points with a lot of people, I think.
So just on that, what about not strictly news, but corporate types running Linux on custom embedded platforms? Have we got a hope of submitting our patches to support that platform upstream of that actually landing?
Please do. Please submit your patches.
Well, yes and yeah.
They're mostly PowerPC.
Clean up and then submit your patches.
Well, I mean, how relevant is your platform? We have, in the ARM space, there's a lot of platforms that we carry around that nobody actually uses anymore, and people spend effort trying to update to modern interfaces when it turns out the piece of hardware has not been sold for 5 years, and when it was sold to two people who never used it.
Yeah, I mean,
there has to be some sanity back.
Yeah, my corporate overlords would like to think that everybody's buying a product.
Sure. Well, you can submit. I mean,
That's probably not really realistic.
There's no pain in submitting.
But if it has a maintainer, in many ways, that's up to you. You submit the patches, you support them, you keep them alive, and then Linus contemplated down the line when you disappear onto Mars or something. But I think that's the actual typical.
If you can guarantee that you're going to continue supporting it past your employment, that's a really important one as well.
Or somebody at your employer will pick up
Pick it up.
Yeah, and I think from the corporate point of view, that's more what we'd need to establish is if I leave my job, someone else picks up where I
You need to have somebody in your organisation where that is their job, to be the Linux kernel maintainer for your client.
And respond to requests. And I'm a maintainer, some of my sub-maintainers say something dodgy with the platform. I want them responsive. I want to be able to ask them to fix something, and they respond and they are there. I've taken out platforms in the past. I'm probably not aggressive enough at doing it. I should take out more. One of the good things though with like the device restart, it has its issues, not super great, but one thing it allows is to significantly reduce the amount of churn for the platform.
So do you have any other new stuff, like any other questions? Okay.
So I submitted a patch to scratch my own page in the IOMMU browser for devices that don't use the correct PCI request line. But I'm not actually sure whether it's of quality that will ever be accepted because I'm not hearing anything back to maintain it.
I'm going to indict myself here. A lot of us, you'll see a patch and you'll forget to get back to it. Don't feel bad about resending patches.
Especially if it was an KML. I mean, I'm a maintainer, I read maybe 2% of a KML. Just possible.
Merge window as well.
And
there are
if it's a simple, trivial bug, there is the trivial patch maintainers and so on. But these guys, there's the kernel newbies website and so on. There's a bunch of guys there that will help, with that sort of thing. Subsystems that aren't maintained, you just submitting a simple patch or something. They'll help you get through the process of getting it merged upstream.
It was a patch with driver to the infrastructure.
Trivial patch
I didn't see that. The problem is that you were mentioning some of that emergency as well, so there wasn't sometimes maintenance just
trivial bugs and trivial problems and so on. So that's another place where you can start. We're just talking about the kernel founders. That's another place you can start just picking up simple things that need fixing and cleaning up and so on.
Okay, it's actually lunchtime. It is now 12:30. Thank you all for coming this morning.